On 30th September 1941, German forces reached the approaches to Moscow. Weeks of heavy fighting in the western sector had badly weakened the Red Army, and the capital's defenses were thin. The German High Command had planned to seize the Soviet capital within 10 to 12 weeks of crossing the border. But stubborn Soviet resistance, especially at Smolensk, slowed the Wehrmacht so much that it arrived outside Moscow only 14 weeks later, long after the schedule. Moscow was not only the capital of the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics and a political center, it was the country's largest industrial and transport hub. Much of the rail network in the European part of the Soviet Union converged there. Its fall, in German thinking, would demoralize both the Red Army and the civilian population. Hitler and his generals believed that taking Moscow could collapse Soviet resistance and bring a quick end to the war in the east. As the Germans closed in, the imbalance became obvious. The Bryansk, Western, and Reserve fronts fielded roughly 1,250,000 Soviet troops. Inside the city, Moscow hurriedly raised 21 divisions of the People's Militia, about 200,000 volunteers, workers, clerks, students, ordinary townspeople. Seeing the danger, Stavka ordered 9 divisions redeployed from the Far East, a move enabled by intelligence that Japan did not plan to attack the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics. German strength was about 2 million men. The Red Army had already suffered heavy losses, new arrivals were often undertrained, and units sometimes relied on obsolete Tsarist-era weapons. Germany retained a major edge in materiel, about 1,700 tanks to 990, over 14,000 guns and mortars to 7,600, and roughly 1,390 aircraft to 667. Sources differ on exact figures, but the Wehrmacht's advantage was real. German planners hoped to take Moscow before winter. Instead, autumn Rasputitsa turned roads into glue. Tanks and trucks bogged down, many routes became unusable. Winter then pushed conditions from bad to brutal. The Germans later blamed the cold, but Soviet soldiers suffered too. Many lacked proper winter kit. Some wore old greatcoats, and militia units sometimes had only worn jackets. The difference was moral. The Red Army was defending its own capital and could not yield. Behind the lines, Soviet partisans struck the German supply network. The so-called Rail War, mass demolitions of tracks and ambushes on road columns, disrupted deliveries of fuel, ammunition, and food. German logistics buckled. Frontline units couldn't sustain assault operations. The Germans scored a major tactical success by encircling 4 Soviet armies near Viasma, inflicting grievous losses. Figures are uncertain. A German estimate of 670,000 prisoners is often cited, though Wehrmacht tallies sometimes counted all military-age males seized in occupied areas. Even so, the pocket consumed German time. While the Wehrmacht reduced it, Moscow strengthened its defenses, laid anti-tank obstacles, and completed the transfer of reserves. On 7th November 1941, with danger near at hand, Moscow staged a military parade. Stalin's presence and the parade itself carried immense symbolic weight. It signaled to Muscovites and to Allied observers that the city would not be surrendered. For Red Army soldiers, it was a powerful morale boost. For the Germans, a vivid demonstration of Soviet resolve. Allied talks on Lend-Lease were underway, but those shipments had not yet shaped the battle for Moscow. By December 1941, the Red Army still relied mainly on internal resources and evacuated factories. The United States entered the war only after Pearl Harbor on 7th December 1941. And Britain needed supplies for North Africa. Moscow's defense was, in essence, sustained by Soviet means. When German units finally reached the city's outskirts, they were spent. Ammunition, fuel, even fodder ran short. A frontal assault on a sprawling metropolis would have required fresh formations, but Army Group Center had no such reserves left after the autumn fighting. Worse, Any crisis on the flanks threatened encirclement, a risk that later became reality at Stalingrad. On 5th December, the Red Army, under Georgy Zhukov and Semyon Timoshenko, launched a counteroffensive. The Germans pulled back in haste. Lacking fuel, some tanks and vehicles were abandoned. Others simply failed to start in the deep cold. The drive on Moscow collapsed. By January 1942, the Germans stabilized their line and halted further Soviet advances, helped by Soviet logistical strain and limited transport for ammunition. But the window for a decisive assault had closed. Total German losses on the Eastern Front since 22nd June 1941 had already surpassed 700,000. Offensive power was drained. Colonel General Heinz Guderian later wrote in his memoirs, "We suffered a serious defeat, which, owing to the obstinacy of the supreme leadership, soon led to fateful consequences." The Army High Command, far from the front, did not understand the actual situation in winter conditions. This lack of understanding led to new, hardly achievable demands. German losses are often understated, and Soviet losses overstated. Even if one accepts official figures of 500,000 German losses versus 950,000 Soviet dead plus 900,000 wounded, the Wehrmacht would appear to have strength left for renewed attacks. In practice, German casualties were higher. Incomplete reports, lost paperwork, and distorted returns mean that historians still lack precise totals. Alongside German miscalculations, the resolve of Soviet soldiers and commanders, regular divisions and people's militia alike, proved decisive. Stavka did not hesitate to commit young cadets and minimally trained volunteers. Their sacrifice bought days and weeks. The Germans underestimated the depth of the defenders' determination to die for Moscow and to contest every kilometer of the approaches. Before Moscow, the enemy suffered its first major defeat in the east. It showed the world that Blitzkrieg was not invincible, and that the Russian soldier was not a mere propaganda construct, but a real force, able to withstand Germany's technological and organizational superiority. That is why the Germans never mounted a true full-scale storm of the Soviet capital. Army Group Center lacked the resources, and the Soviet defense did not break, despite inferior numbers and the brutal winter. Despite extreme conditions, and despite the chaos and losses of the war's opening months, the Red Army and the people of Moscow kept the Germans from the city. In World War II history, the defense of Moscow stands as a turning point and a lasting symbol of the Soviet people's courage and endurance.